The other thing we're going to go over is an overview of what's left. Now this changes depending on the semester and the year. But as a rule, you guys may not know this. The reason why you take U.S. history is for cultural literacy. It is important that you have a basic idea of the storyline. That is objective number one. But my primary concern, the one that's far more important, is to developing your critical thinking skills, right? So what that means is that the storyline is certainly not going to come up to 2017. Even if I had all the time in the world, why wouldn't I come up to 2017?
Because it's not all
It's not history. We have no idea. In fact, the last 20 years, we don't really have knowledge. We don't have access to the papers that President Bush the Younger used. So if I tell you about it, all I'm going to do is tell you about news reports. That's not history. That's current events. And so as a rule, I don't usually come up until about 1991. That's my end date because that's the end of the Cold War. And we have lots of papers on that, and I've seen most of these papers, so I don't have a problem with that. Go ahead.
Am I missing something? Is there a reason that there are no papers for like what Bush used or?
Oh, okay. No president. Clinton's papers are probably only now opening up. As a rule, you have a 25-year delay because some of the things, well, a lot of the things that they're dealing with are secure. They are sensitive. And so you can't just go rifling through. Not only does it deal with, say, national security issues, but it also may deal with people that are very much alive. And so they had confidentiality when they're dealing with whatever the United States was doing, and so they continue to do that. 25 years is a minimum for most of the papers. Often for anything dealing with national security, we have a 50-year wait. It depends on the subject when they get going through it. Even if they open it up, now that we are in our modern age with all the computers and technologies, you might think we might have less papers. The fact is we have at least 10, 15 times more papers. And so they have to be processed. So even though they're open up, it takes them forever to go through and process them. So the fact is it takes a long. I've gone through all the presidents' libraries up until even Bush the Younger. I went to his president's library. There wasn't anything in it, just a big building there. President the Elder, Bush the Elder, had already had a building. I went there, no papers, very, very few papers. Papers back when he was a senator and stuff like that, but not many of the presidential papers. Carter's papers, we got Nixon's papers, we got right off the bat. So there's all sorts of different times and levels. Part of that was that Congress took them all at the time. This was in 1974. Okay, so this is as far as I'm going to go just in general. But this particular year, we've been kind of slow. So there's no way on earth that we can actually get to 1991. Where are we at now in terms of chronology? Roughly 1950. So it's not that far. It's only 40 years, but how many lectures do we have?
4.
We have a little bit of today, which is not going to be a lecture. Then we have 1 real lecture, 2 another real lecture, 3 a third real lecture, and then the last one is like a half lecture because most of it's going to be the prep. So that's 3.5. Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to do left. Since my primary goal is cultural literacy for the 4th unit, no matter when I teach it. In other words, I'm not nearly as exhaustive on this 4th unit as I am with Unit 3 or Unit 2 or Unit 1. Just as a rule, part of it is because it's a different kind of a unit because we're dealing with kind of contemporary affairs. The other part is that it's really the most important purpose of learning from 50 to the present. There are people, many people, that are still alive who were born before 1950. That means that they lived this history. And so we need to know about it for cultural literacy. If someone puts gate at the end of some silly word, what does that mean? a scandal, right? Where did that come from? It's cultural literacy. You should know it. Not just by recognizing the name, you should know why and how. There's things that we talk about, which is kind of funny now, but we talk about the Cold War and the Berlin Wall. You need to know what that is, because that's part of cultural literacy. If someone says, yeah, that's when the Berlin Wall fell, and you look at them with a dazed look, yes, I know it happened before you were born, but lots of things happened before you were born. You need to know what they're talking about. Berlin Missile Crisis, that's ages ago. You need to know what they're talking about. Okay? And so, because of this, we don't have much time. I'm not going to go chronological. I'm going to go topically. These are the topics you need to make sure that you know. Okay? We already mentioned civil rights. I'm going to talk about it again. I'm not going to go into the depth that you probably got in your 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. This is not something that gets skipped over in the lower grades, so I'm not too worried about it. I am going to talk about it, though, particularly in terms of how it is different in the 40s to the 50s and the 60s. Specifically, and I'll tell you blunt now, most of the civil rights work was done before the baby boomers came of age. Most of the civil rights work was done by the baby boomers' parents. And I'm telling you this because civil rights is like the biggest thing in the world for all the baby boomer types. This is like their moment. It was done before they came of age. And yet they own it. They talk about when they were marching in the 1960s. Okay, maybe. But all the work was done before they did all that marching. You need to understand this. This is all part of a really big concept dealing with the baby boomers. And this is important because this refers to certain generational differences. And this is important for you today. How many of you guys actually watch television? This is very funny because 15 years ago, everybody's watching television. When I was in college, probably 2 hours a day at least watching television. People don't watch television anymore. You watch Netflix, you watch Hulu, you do something on YouTube. Television isn't in our playground.
It's all on demand. We don't
It's
have
on
time.
demand, that's right. Television used to be what everybody watched. Why is this a big deal? Well, your interface to information, particularly news and current events, is different than it was even 20 years ago, which means it's different than your parents. Your parents' interface to communication was different than their parents. But let's pretend that you actually did watch television. You guys know what the 6 o'clock news is? The news at 6. Now you guys don't realize this, but this was like the thing. When I was in high school at, in 1982, 83, going to visit my grandma. I don't care what day it is, I don't care what's going on in the world, 6 o'clock, Grandpa's sitting there, got his TV tray out, he's watching the 6 o'clock news. Everybody was watching the 6 o'clock news. That was your main vehicle of information, 6 o'clock news. Okay, we still have 6 o'clock news. Has anybody watched it? In this classroom, has anybody seen the 6 o'clock news in the past week? You? Do you watch it regularly? Because it's a different generation, right? Do you guys, when did you watch it?
Monday.
Do you regularly watch it, or did it happen to be on?
Yeah, usually we eat dinner then, and my parents got it on.
Your parents, totally, it's your parents. What else? Who else said? Yeah.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, yeah, well see, it's totally different. I actually used to be more happy with the 10 o'clock because I was a later owl. Okay, so if you watch the 6 o'clock news, can you remember anything about any of the commercials that were on in the 6 o'clock news?
A lot of old people medication.
It's totally about old people medication. Depends, retirement plans, erectile dysfunction, cholesterol, whatever you can imagine, boom. Why?
Because those
Who's watching this? It's going to be the old people, right? It's a different demand. Well, you guys also know, because I don't have to introduce to you what the name baby boomers refers to. I'll explain it real quickly. You guys know it already, but everybody came home from the war. They just wanted to settle. Birth rates skyrocketed. I mean, increased 25% every year. Increased 25% every year for about 5 years. By the midst of the 1950s, 1 out of every 3 was a baby boomer, young. And so this affects it because you know, especially if you're an advertiser or something, that means that you know that 1/3 of your population is going to fit under this demographic. From most of the 50s, are you targeting baby boomers? Throughout most of the 50s, if we're looking at somewhere between, say, 1944 to 1950s when they're born, how old are they through most of the 50s? Under 10, maybe, under 12. Are you targeting the baby boomers? Who are you targeting?
The children of baby boomers.
Their parents, right? Because they're only 10. Right? They're only 10. So the parents of the baby boomers. The parents of the baby boomers. But the wonderful thing is that you know that all these guys all have kids, because that's the biggest demographic. Well, as you go through the decades, that demographic remains big. One of the reasons why they're so tied to the civil rights is that they all became of age at the same time. And they're your age, right? What do you guys want to do? Change the world, right? When there's changes that are already going on, you get to own it. It doesn't matter that you were like 3 when most of these changes started. You still own it. And so that when you become 40 or 50 and you tell your kids, yeah, I was the one that did this, you conveniently forget that it was actually your parents that did this. Nevertheless, they have a huge impact. They have a big impact in what defines, certainly by the late 60s. And I have to tell you, late 60s, even though we like happy numbers, 60 to 70 to 80, usually it's midway that you see some of these changes. Late 60s, throughout the 70s, they're kind of defining the popular culture. By the time we get into the 80s, they start becoming the bosses. By the 1990s, they're the bosses and often in charge of large portions of our agencies, our bureaucracy, the colleges. Okay? What's happening right about now after the aughts and the tens? Which explains all the ads. What's happening to the baby boomer generation? They're retiring and dying, right? So by the time we get into the 20s, they'll still be around a little bit, but they're going to be a different type of a voice. Since you know that there's such a huge population going through there, it's important to understand them. Because that's going to be part of why a lot of the way that we act to these things, why there's such a cultural reaction. Because a lot of the people that are reacting are kind of from the same age cohort. And that's important. So we're going to talk about civil rights. We're also going to talk about the election of 1968. And this is a huge shift. You can call it a realignment. It's a massive realignment for the Democrat Party, and it becomes a realignment for the Republican Party. And again, I'll just tell you in plain English. Today, we had an election, 2016. If I say civil rights, then I ask you to tell me which political party is most associated with civil rights, what would you say? Don't be shy. Tell me obviously what comes to brain. Democrats. You'd say that, right? Because somehow you say Democrats are for civil rights, Republicans are racist. Okay? It's hogwash, but that's the association. Humor of all humors. I said the civil rights movement was largely done prior to the baby boomers generation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was written by Democrat or Republican? Republican. Okay. In fact, the Republicans owned civil rights basically since the Civil War. Remember, it was the North that fought the South. The South were the Democrats. The Democrats were defined by their support for segregation. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but it was great joy for the Republicans to always kind of make life a little miserable for the northern Democrats. People like John F. Kennedy. You guys think John F. Kennedy, civil rights leader, right? He never pushed any of this stuff because he was a Democrat, and so he could not offend his southern base. And so the best thing that the Republicans could do, because they know that he personally, from Massachusetts, supported civil rights, he couldn't talk about it. He couldn't publicly support it because his base was from the South. And so the Republicans loved pushing civil rights bills. We did this in 57, we did it in 60. The one that comes up in 1964 first came up in 1960, and this was the Republicans. And we did it because we solely wanted JFK to not support it, because he so wanted to. But today, you get the exact opposite. Why? Because of this 68 election. Okay? It actually happens a little bit before this. We'll explain it. It's called realignment. A realignment is when you kind of shift the base of your party. And the Democrats shift from the South to urban areas. This was because of LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Democrat. And he used the death of JFK to do this. We'll talk about it. You've got to understand this. By 68, the Democrats are aligned with civil rights, even though for the previous 100 years, in fact, if you go back to the beginning, the election of 1840, when the Democrats do a little party change that basically tied the South to the Democrat, you're talking 120 years. They were opposed to this, but by 68, they had the realignment. And what they did, I'll say now, is that they basically associated poverty with racism. So the people are racist because there's poverty in the country. And this is a wonderful, LBJ in terms of politics is brilliant here. Because all he says is that if we use federal dollars to cure poverty, what are we also curing? Racism. So let's go one step backwards. Let us say we don't believe in government reform being defined as restraint, as action, but we believe it in restraint. Let's say we don't want to spend government dollars. Then what do we get called? We don't want to spend money to pay for welfare, so what do we get called? Racist. That's what's happened, and it's been that way ever since. Which is why people say, well, Republicans are racist. It's a very dominant, very popular narrative. What they're really saying is Republicans don't want to spend the money. Money is the equivalent of racism. You don't give them the money, you must be racism. Now, you guys all understand that individually, there's gobs of Democrats that aren't all that tolerant. Similarly, there's gobs of Republicans that are unbelievably tolerant. But it has nothing to do with the real demographics. What you're dealing with is a shift. It's a outlier. It's a realignment. Democrats get associated with the urban vote, and so as long as we pour money into this, then people that want bigger government are going to support this. Last election, 2016, where were all the Democrat votes? You guys have seen these maps, right? Cities. Where were the Republican votes? Rural areas. It's because of this. This is cultural literacy. You need to be aware of this, right? Now, Republicans not only got the label of racism, but they also got the label of law and order. Law and order, like they don't support crime. They're not soft on criminals. This was, again, as a result of the election of 1968. And so the Republicans may have had insult. The Democrats also get it. The Democrats get the charge of being radical or soft on crime or whatever you want to say, warm and fuzzy. And it's because the Republicans kind of claimed the law and order side of things. This is 1968. This is really important because it still holds today. But it's particularly important because the other connection that we're going to start talking about is Watergate. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But you guys are smart enough to realize that if Richard Nixon, who is a Republican, gets a victory in 68 based off of law and order, And if he gets an absolute landslide in 72 based on Law and Order, then why would the appearance of criminality in the Watergate scandal be a problem for him? It's a big scandal, right? It's because of the Law and Order stance that makes this scandal big. We're going to talk about Watergate really briefly, but we're also going to talk about how Watergate empowered journalists. This is when the news media had its biggest heyday in the 1970s. People listened, people respected, we thought of them as being unbiased. Now, just pause for a second. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to be utterly honest. Do you think mainstream media is unbiased today? Does anybody raise your hand if you think that these guys are unbiased? They have no position one way or the other. Nobody. In fact, it's like their credibility is just dumped into the toilet. Not just with the election of 2016. It's been declining for a good long time. Part of it is that you guys don't sit down and watch the 6 o'clock news like you used to. In the 70s, how many channels did we have? I'll tell you. In my household, we had 4. ABC, CBS, NBC, and PBS. And that's when I was living in Tacoma, Washington, which is a great big city of about 500,000 people. When I moved out to the farm, I got 1 channel. That was it, because it's an antenna. What did we not have throughout most of the 70s? Satellite, cable, wasn't there. Those are the only channels because they're the only ones you got on the antenna. I don't know if you guys have antennas. Theoretically, you can put an antenna here in Richland Center and you get Me TV and Antenna TV. I've tried it, haven't got anything. But theoretically, you could do this. If you live closer to Madison, you can get it. You could probably get it because I know Cazenovia can get Me TV. But for the most part, there's no channels. By the way, Me TV is another one which is totally for the old folks. It's a wonderful channel. I love it, but it's a different demographic. The point is, now that we have cable, now, I don't have it in my household. I'm kind of part, I think there's a new kind of revival where people don't watch television, so they're not spending money on cable, they're not spending money on satellite. But right beginning in the 80s, people were getting 150 channels. So they weren't watching NBC, ABC, CBS as religiously. That's when it began to decline. They were still watching 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news, but you also have TBS, TNT, Fox station, whatever the other cable stations are. By the time you get into the 90s, some of these cable stations are pulling shows that are more popular than the mainstream networks. By the time you get into the aughts, there's no distinction, and in fact, some of the main stations are beginning to lose. Now that we're in the teens, you guys don't watch television. What's happening to these television stations? They're in serious trouble. Who's the big ones? Netflix is a big company. Hulu's, Amazon Prime. These guys are the ones that are having the downloadable programming. What's going to happen by the 20s? Not sure, but it's a totally different landscape. So the point here is that journalism rose huge. Under Watergate, it's going to eventually fall. But until that time happens, for most of the 70s and 80s, it's going to be dominant. By the 90s, it'll fall. The other thing we're going to talk about, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I'm going to talk about how Watergate is going to bring us Carter, and Carter is going to bring us Reagan. And this is going to be kind of the last topic, because I need to tell you about the rise of the Cold War and the end of the Cold War. And in this discussion, kind of separate, we're going to talk about not just Vietnam, but also Korea. And I like to talk about these at the same time, even though, hopefully you're aware, Korea is from 50 to 53, and Vietnam, technically, is from 65 to 73. Okay? So, decade apart. And yet, in terms of the Cold War, they both serve the same function. In terms of the practical implementation, they are the exact opposites. And that's what I'm going to focus on. because there are two different approaches to the Cold War. One was relatively successful, the other was not so successful. Okay? So once you understand why we're in the Cold War, then we're going to talk about the end of the Cold War. And the end of the Cold War is the late 80s and 90s. And usually we say when the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, the Cold War is over. But the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989, and that's really when we see it coming. And in fact, very popular, two people's names are associated with this. This is hated by a lot of our modern historians, but still recognized. Pope John Paul II and Ronald Reagan, hugely influential in ending the Cold War. One was from the outside, one was from the inside. By the time their administrations and everything is done, the war is over. And so we have to ask, why? What role could they have done? Pope John Paul II is a totally non-political guy. He's not a military guy. And yet, there's going to be an impact. And so in order to understand this, we have to understand the Cold War, how it was fought, and then we have to understand how it ended. In this, if I'm able to, I'll talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I'll spend at least 12 minutes on it. Maybe 12 seconds, we'll see. It's not a huge thing, but it's one of these things that in terms of cultural literacy, you have to understand. And the Cuban Missile Crisis is going to be associated with the Berlin Wall. It's going to be associated also, oddly enough, with the Vietnam War. So, not in quite the same way you might think. That's it. That's a cultural literacy section. I'm not going to go detail to detail, administration to administration. So I want you guys to be looking at these topics. That's what you need to be reading. All of the keywords are going to be the same because we'll still cover all the key information. We'll just do it a different way. Go ahead.
And this is what these are what the exam is on?
Yep. The keywords are the same. No change on the keywords list. The same essay question is also the same. Because instead of being as detailed as we have in terms of talking about, each 5-year period and going through the specific practices, we're going to be more topical. I'm going to talk about just the topic so that you understand what we're referring to. The danger here, you got to understand this, danger of talking about things topically is that sometimes you don't have the context. This is why I recommend never getting online and just typing in one of your keywords and seeing what the internet says. Because it's like you're taking a piece here, and a piece here, and a piece here. I'm going to go topically, but I'm going to try to tie it into a larger story. If you're quick, I just told you the story just now, right? I'll give you a bit more detail as we come over each part of it. But there is a storyline. I am, though, going to mainly focus one topic to the next to the next. Questions, comments, words of wisdom.